Welcome to our latest edition of 41 is the Mic. We are here post-game talking about the Chiefs and the Jaguars, and I am Matt Derrick of Chiefs Digest. Joining me, my co-host, dear friend, Nick Jacobs from KSHB 41 News. Nick and I are still exploring our enclosure like animals at the zoo, so I'll be your host this week. Nick will be the sidekick, and we'll just change it around, and you'll never know what's going on. But
you like to explore the room? Yeah, I'm exploring the room right now. You got to keep it unpredictable. This is the opportunity to do that. Just like the Chiefs' performance was somewhat unpredictable.
I was just getting ready to say the Chiefs are also exploring their room and their enclosure right now
of the 2023 season.
and there's no reason to start off a win on a bad note. So let's talk about the good thing, which is that the 2023 Chiefs are driven by their defense, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's not the case the entire season. But I mean, hey, if that's what they got to do until the offense gets up to a certain standard that everybody's used to, I mean, hey, whatever gets them to another playoff run and hopefully another championship, I'm completely for it.
I think everybody had a lot of questions, and obviously there were a lot of questions for Steve Spagnuolo before the season about this defensive line and what it was going to be either with or without Chris Jones. Today, we got to see what it's like with Chris Jones out there, and what are your thoughts? Because it certainly didn't look like they missed a step today.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, at times you could tell, don't get me wrong. Whenever you and I saw him Wednesday at the press conference, he was in fantastic shape, which you and I both didn't doubt to begin with, because we know how intense that guy works out down the floor. It's just a matter of when you have the helmet and shoulder pads on, and you got guys who are pushing back against you, and that's going to make you sore, and you're even using muscles then that you may not use in training, and you don't realize until you feel it a day or two later or 3 days later. And it'll be interesting to see what Chris Jones' recovery is like this week. But I mean, look, he gave what he had and what he was available to out there in that Jacksonville Heat. And so, I mean, he was a big difference maker, and I'm glad we don't have to find out what it would be like without him in week 2.
The thing that most impressed me, though, I think, was just how effective they were against the run. I mean, they had a fairly strong week last week against, I think, a better offensive line with the Lions. Today, I think you were hoping that you could stop Travis Etienne, but they really bottled him up early. I mean, it was pretty impressive, the show of force they were able to show on the run side of the ball.
Yeah, and when you have Chris taking on double teams for the most part, then that definitely allows everybody to win their one-on-ones. And Karlaftis, it was funny whenever in the pass rushing part of it early on there, when they rotated Jones and Karlaftis, and Jones went to end and Karlaftis was inside, they had a contained play where Jones was the end and came up and caught the attention of the running back and right tackle. Then Karlaftis just kind of hung back in a delay, and then they flushed Lawrence up to where they wanted him to go, and then Karlaftis was waiting to make that sack. So I mean, but that was a strategy thing they were actually doing, because you could tell just because Karlaftis was maintaining right there and waiting a tick or two, like they got him to go where they wanted to. And that when you have a Chiefs pass rush at that level, that's what you're going to potentially be able to get. So having somebody of Chris Jones' talent out there, with Felix getting more comfortable, with Mike Dana being a guy who can dominate at a defensive tackle spot and clear rushing downs, that combination, we bring a Minihue back. There's more than 5 guys that they can rush with comfortably and be able to be effective. And long term, you're hoping to get to 8, because that's what most successful defenses pass rushing wise have.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Minihue, because right now, even if you're talking about that third down package with Jones and Anadike Uzama coming in, Felix coming in on the outside, and then Karlaftis and Dana going inside, that looks like a pretty strong front four that you can really pin your ears back on third down, and you don't have to blitz with that group.
Yeah, and if Steve Spagnuolo doesn't have to blitz, he just has the option to blitz. If he wants to get the ball out at a certain point, that's going to make that Chiefs defense very, very dangerous long term, because there's quarterbacks they're going to be going against. There's one next week, Justin Fields, that if you can dictate what they do and where they're going to throw it to by how you blitz, then that becomes a problem, and then those teams become pretty predictable pretty quickly.
One thing I was also impressed with, I mean, even though it wasn't that very long, when Nick Bolton got dinged up and came out for a couple of plays, I mean, you're going to miss Nick Bolton. I mean, especially if he's out long term. But back short term, Drew Trank was able to step in there, and they really didn't look like they missed a beat.
Yeah, and I mean, Drew Trank was a fantastic coverage linebacker. He reads well. In all honesty, I'm hoping to see him start, whether it's this year, if they are able to retain his services and bring him back next year. He deserves a starting spot because he's honestly, in my opinion, more of the linebacker they need for this scheme to be successful overall, more so than just necessarily being kind of a downhill run thumper, which is kind of honestly more of what they have with Willie Gay, Nick Bolton, and Leo Chenal. Like those three collectively, they're more downhill guys. Tranquil's a guy that can drop back because early on the Jaguars were trying that play action pass that the Lions did to see how it'd work. Yeah. And Lawrence was off and he wasn't as accurate as he needed to be. So then they kind of abandoned that, and then the run game wasn't working. So they couldn't lean on the stuff that either the Lions did last week or they did against the Colts. And I think that kind of took away a lot of their rhythm for Jacksonville, that is.
And I do have to give big time kudos to Leo Chenal, though, because he did not fall for the banana in the tailpipe. I was so proud. I mean, I like to work that phrase and anytime I can, Nick, into anything. Mm-hmm. But on that throwback pass, he did not fall for the banana in the tailpipe.
Yeah, and I mean, like that. Part of me kind of wonders if that's what they were working on when Lawrence threw it back laterally the first time. I kind of want, and the Chiefs took recovery at that point, that fumble. That kind of made me wonder. I'm like, okay, is that, when I saw it later on, I was like, is that what they were working on? They wanted to see how the secondary reacted and if they bit up on it or not, so that they could try to, do this part of the play and everything. So when I look at the coach's film when that comes out, I'll be intrigued to see that part of it. But part of me kind of wondered if that was something they were testing out. But then later on, Lawrence got in a panic when he was getting sacked by Chris Jones late in that game and threw it a little bit backwards again, and that happened. So maybe it wasn't, but I don't know. We'll see on that journey later on this week.
I mean, we are in a bit unusual territory where we're talking so much about the Chiefs defense because it played so well. I don't know if we can say the same thing about the offense. They won, but through 2 weeks, this is the highest scoring team in the league last year, averaging 29 points a game. Through 2 games, they're averaging 19 points. Nick, is it time to panic?
I'm not going to say yet because I still part of me is Juan Taylor still figuring out where he needs to properly align to not get called and when to not false start. I mean, him and Donovan Smith, they're working out their comfort level in the system. I mean, don't get me wrong. They're better pass blockers and they're better protection overall collectively, to where Mahomes has the time to go find the receivers. It's just that offense right now is just definitely not in sync. I mean, from a receiver perspective, Kelsey's still kind of working his way back. You can still see he's a little bit slow, a tick slower, everything, just like on that one comeback touchdown there to the pylon, that's a West Coast staple that Kelsey's caught time and time again to convert short yardage and to catch a couple touchdowns. He was just a little off on that with Mahomes. And Mahomes is normally expecting him to be a little bit, you could tell Mahomes expected him to kind of be where he normally would. And coming out of that break, you could tell it wasn't in sync the way that it normally would be. And so I think it's honestly probably going to take Kelsey another week of practice and maybe even a couple of weeks just to kind of get back in the rhythm. And that shows you just how quickly something can kind of fall off a little bit just from, an injury in that amount of time, to kind of not just be a hair or two slower in that regard.
I mean, Travis is the last guy in the world who's ever going to tell you if he's hurting, and he certainly is never going to blame an injury. But I thought it was pretty telling in the post-game press conference when he was asked about the injury and everything. He kind of took a beat before saying, no, the injury had nothing to do with it. I mean, you can tell he's not 100%. And I mean, and so at one hand, you give it to the guy for gutting it out there. But then again, I mean, is at the same time, is this the time where maybe Travis does need to back it off a little bit, trying to find a way to make sure that he's ready later in the season? And, right now, the Chiefs have a lot of mouths to feed on offense. I mean, he gets 9 targets today, 4 catches. Do some of those targets, does that ball need to be going to somewhere else right now?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is they're going to have to keep working with, they're going to have to keep working Justin Ross and Rashee Rice, and they're going to have to work those guys in to kind of get them reps and get them the packages that, you and I heard Beach talk about in that Zoom that we were on, in terms of like him hinting that they're going to have some packages and kind of slowly work them in, just like the Chiefs did with Tyreek and like the Chiefs have done with every other new wide receiver in their offense over Andy Reid's tenure here. So, I mean, I fully expect that to be part of the case. But on top of it, Sky Moore, you're still trying to get him confidence and get him in rhythm. Kadarius Toney, you're still trying to help him find a rhythm, and that may take this whole entire month, where he may not be in rhythm for week 5, week 6, around that range, just because of being that far off from training camp, and that may take a whole month to work back to that potential level. So, I mean, it's just a matter of those guys staying as healthy as they can, the O-line giving them the right amount of time they need, being able to lean on a strong running game that it goes north-south, stop going laterally. You have an offensive line that can knock people off the ball if you allow them to do it. You don't do as much finesse running. So if they do those little things, I mean, what they were doing with the Jaguars today, the Jaguars love to crash up in their scheme and they love to attack. So if you throw the slants, you throw the drag routes, you keep everything in front of them and the sticks, they love that. That's what they thrive on. That's what that scheme thrives on. So the Chiefs were playing into their hand for a certain portion of it. And when you get back in the sticks and down a distance, that just encourages them even more to really kind of sit back there and just kind of let you explore the first 10 yards.
The one thing that really stood out to me about the offense today was clearly the mistakes. Last week against Detroit, it was the drops. That was more than anything else. I mean, that team, if it just hadn't dropped the ball, would have beaten the Lions rather convincingly. Today, they caught the ball. There were no problems with drops, but penalties, fumbles, just the mistakes were very uncharacteristic for this team. Is this just, another byproduct of the youth on this team and the new faces on this team all getting used to each other? Is there a pressing going on? Do you see? I mean, and I know Andy Reid said, hey, it wasn't the humidity, it wasn't the heat, causing these problems today, but he conceded. I mean, this is not who they are. I mean, what is causing this? That this offense that we're used to kind of moving like clockwork has just really kind of sputtered the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think more so today. I know Coach Reid may not say that, and he doesn't like to make excuses. But I mean, when you're out in that heat, I mean, you and I could see at times up at St. Joe when that heat got out there. I mean, there was some of those type of issues. So I mean, I'm gonna add that to be a little piece or a little account of it. I'm not gonna say that's the whole aspect of it, but I mean, that when you're tired and when you're dealing with heat sometimes, you may not take that extra step or you may not make that extra reach block to be able to get in position, and you may be a little worn out. So I'm not stunned that may be a little portion of the case for those guys as they continue to build up their game stamina, since this is really only their second game that they're playing 60 to 70 snaps versus preseason. If they got to 30, that was half of the game in that aspect of it. But I mean, like, that's a piece of the puzzle of it. And then, like you said, I mean, I think they're going against different opponents now. They're not just getting looks, and people are adjusting to it. So I think from a receiver perspective, they're still trying to find their rhythm collectively. I think they're still trying to find their identity overall and who they're going to be and how confident they can be. And, I was talking with Mick Shaver, sports director, and he brought up a good point. It just seems like sometimes they're still trying to replace what they lost in Kareem Hunt. They're still trying to replace what they lost in Tyreek. Yeah. And then someday the reality is they're going to have to try to replace what they lost in Kelsey, but that you may not be able to. You may have to, may not be able to take that same road every time. So Kadarius Toney may not be able to be that Tyreek Hill. Isaiah Pacheco may not be able to be that Kareem Hunt. You're just going to have to kind of find new ways to evolve and continue to move forward and help Mahomes build that comfort level with whoever it needs to be.
And, and to me, almost today is one of those days where I almost want to say the turnovers didn't bother me because, on the one hand, I mean, the Richie James turnover, I don't know how he could have avoided it. You lose the ball in the sun. I mean, the only thing you can do is just get out of the way. But then again, I mean, if you lose the ball in the sun a half second before it hits you, there's not much you can do. But then the other play is, the other fumbles. I mean, Jacksonville had the same ball security problem. So it was clearly both sides on that one. They were just fortunate they didn't turn the ball over. Fumble goes out of bounds on a lateral. I mean, they had their own problems, but the penalties were the bigger issue. I mean, the Chiefs had 12, Jacksonville 2. That's quite a difference. But then again, a lot of those penalties were on the offensive line, and quite a few of them were on Juwan Taylor. Is this just a case of Juwan was under the microscope today and that Chiefs offensive line was under the microscope and it's a one-time thing, or is this something that needs to be watched going forward?
That's kind of a question for Andy Heck that he's going to have to figure out over these next couple of weeks when they face the Jets, they better have it corrected, just because going against that defense, it's going to be pretty intense. And that Jets defense, they're going to be able to bring some heat. So you better have things tightened up by that point. But yeah, I mean, Taylor had the microscope on him. That was pretty much clear. There was a couple times where I'm like, man, they may get him right here, and they didn't. I'm like, oh, okay. So it was a little inconsistent. And then like the Donovan Smith hold when he hooked him, totally, I totally get the call, and I'm not against that call. But then when it happened to Chris Jones, where it should have been a safety on the Jaguars, I'm like, all right, guys, you got to call that even. I mean, that's fine that you called it on Donovan, but you've got to call it there too. And so there was a little inconsistency in that aspect of that. So, I mean, or otherwise that game might be over a little bit quicker than what it was. But, I mean, I'm still open right now because, I mean, for me, the 2023 Chiefs are a blank slate until like week 7 or 8. That's who they become at that point. So it's something to monitor and see if it's going to be a trend. But until long term, it gets to, until we get to week 7 or 8, and this is happening over and over again, which you and I both hope doesn't happen. But until it gets to that point, I think just like you and I are in this podcast, Chiefs are still exploring the room.
Indeed, they are. Now, one of those 12 penalties did go against Travis Kelce. He had another penalty that was offset. Oddly enough, neither of the penalties were assessed against him for punting a football into the stands. So there's that. But we saw a little bit of maybe 25-year-old Travis Kelce out there today with the emotions than the almost 34-year-old Travis Kelce. What do you make of that? Is that, maybe just Travis having a bad day and a bad year? Because we saw he had a little bit of a temper in training camp when people were going at him and giving him the business and everything. And now his first game back, and he had some chippiness out there today.
Yeah, I was a little surprised for his first game back to kind of. I don't know. I mean, part of me kind of wonders. I was debating about it in my head. I'm like, okay, so I mean, he's coming off that injury. Is this what's helping him keep that edge, to feel like he's still keeping that up to that step that he's used to, even though he may not be 100%? But then another part of me, kind of like, man, there was a couple times there where I don't know what the Jaguars were saying to him or what was being exchanged back and forth, because I can only imagine what they may have been saying to him to put that temper at that level. Or were they making Taylor Swift references like everybody's been making for this entire week now that he's had to deal with, had to hear? I mean, you heard it in the broadcast, you hear it everywhere on social media. There's references across the world about it at this point. Is that a piece of that puzzle? But I knew something was up whenever Mahomes went out on a scramble, and then I see Kelce just buries 23 into the ground, and like he is still pancaking him. And then, like, I see Mahomes pop up, and Kelce's still pancaking this dude in the ground. And then he pops up, and then that 23 is like, well, what's going on here? And then later, I think they got into it again later on that drive and down the road after Sky Moore's, and I got into it with some other guys on the secondary. So I can only imagine what was being said out there and what type of edge Mike Caldwell's got that Jaguars defense potentially playing with. And I kind of wonder if it rivals with that 2018 defense that liked to talk a lot for the Jaguars back then too.
Well, and as you have noted, this is not exactly a Jaguars team that, let's say, lives a clean lifestyle when it comes to maybe having a little attitude.
I am not going to comment on a certain player from social media that I had fans of that base in my mentions pretty much all week long, even today after an interception that he had. Look, I mean, he's I get it. He's the guy they're going to root for. He's a part of the team they're going to root for. I totally get it. I understand people are going to disagree with my opinion on it, and that's completely fine. I'm not upset about that. But when certain people were commenting about either my weight or some of those things, that's when it got unnecessary, and that's when I'm like, all right, you're done. I'm not listening to that anymore. And then he had more people come into the mentions that said I couldn't handle it and that type of stuff. I'm like, no, there's just a certain boundary I have. It doesn't like my thought process is there's a certain boundary to where I'm okay. You have a right to your opinion. I'm not going to be upset about it, even if we disagree. But when it gets to a certain personal point to where it has nothing to do with the conversation, you're just saying that because you're upset about it. That's when it gets to a certain level where I'm like, all right, we're done with this. This is done. And on top of it, it's simply just an opinion. It doesn't affect his life. He's still going to receive his paycheck. He's still going to go out there and train hard and try to play football to the best of his ability. So like it just, I don't know. One of those unique things about social media and society that you get reminded about sometimes. So that's my high horse. I apologize.
That is a great high horse. I'm absolutely right there with you on this high horse because it goes both ways. There's a lot of people that take things too far online, and sometimes they blow things out of proportion, and they can't take just accurate criticism and accurate observations. And you know what? I mean, I think there's a reasonable point there when you're talking about Travis and, and everything, because what we saw in training camp, I mean, Travis wasn't going out of the way looking for fights. I mean, when he had some issues with a couple of guys, it was because that was like maybe the sixth guy at the end of a play that was trying to poke the ball loose, and the heat index was 100 degrees. Well, there was probably a lot of talking in between plays today that we just didn't see. Yeah. And there's no doubt. I mean, when the other team wants to needle anybody, if they want to pick on somebody, they're picking on Travis.
And they're probably making Taylor Swift comments in some way, shape, or form. Because as people remember, Shannon Sharp back in the day, he found out allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly, found out a number and kept mentioning that number to Derek Thomas, and that's what set him off in that Monday night meltdown. So, I mean, whatever a guy's got to do to get into other players' heads, they're willing to do it. And that's it wouldn't stun me if we don't find out down the road that was something that maybe transpired today. But yes, I was surprised to see Travis punt a football into the stands, and I was surprised there wasn't a penalty on that one because I don't know if the rules have changed in any way, shape, or form, but I mean, I'm pretty sure that was. I don't remember if there's still a rule for a prop, if that's considered a prop, and then if the fines and all that stuff. I don't know. We'll see as the week goes on. There's too many rules in my head right now.
It was different because usually when I see a non-punter punt the football into the stands, it's because they're angry about something rather than Travis just celebrating a touchdown.
And I was trying to remember, I was like, was that the knee that he hurt that he was punting the football with? I'm like, I know the right knee was the one he had the sleeve on this week. And I'm like, is he punting with that one? I'm like, I guess it must be fine then.
Hey, as we learned with the Kelsey brothers, anything's in bounds for those guys when it comes to they'll let nothing hold them back. And that's why we love them, right?
Yeah, no, they have a great podcast. New Heights is fantastic, and I listen to it every week. I still got to get through the other half of it. That is, it's a couple car rides for me to and from work for that one.
They go a long time. We don't go as long, Nick. We just try to get in and out and get people informed and tell them what we think, and then we're out of here. And so
we try to be like an efficient fast food drive-through.
There you go.
A podcast.
We're long enough to cook some chicken while we're in line waiting for food.
As long as it passed health department
that's right
standards, that's all I ask.
The Chiefs win this one 17-9. The defense looking great. I know the defense themselves are not surprised. Maybe Chiefs fans are a little surprised at how strong they've been out of the box, but been very impressive. The offense still exploring its enclosure, trying to find its mood. We'll see what happens next week when they take on the Bears.
Every time I hear you say explore the enclosure, I think of the Fat Bear contest coming up every single time, and how it's a Fat Bear, Big Bear. I can't remember. I know there's bears involved, and they're eating salmon.
It's the Fat Bear Week for the Bears of Katmai National Park in Alaska, and so yes, the voting will be coming up in early October, Nick. So I'll make sure you know.
That's all I ask, Matt. That's all I ask in this world is that you let me know so I can vote on this.
Well, we'll let everybody know. We might have to talk about Fat Bear Week, in a future episode for at least a couple of minutes. Thanks for joining us, everybody. On 41 is the mic. We will see you next time.